All right, well, welcome everybody. I am, for those of you who don't know me, I am Meg Pritchard. That is my blind deaf dog, Bo. You will hear him every once in a while because he has no idea what's going on in the world and just likes to bark. Sorry about that. I am the political director for Represent. So that means, for the most part, when I'm not doing one of these lovely breakfast briefings, I am focused on the endorsement process for selecting and funding our fantastic endorsed women candidates for State House and State Senate. It is, I'll put in a plug now, a terrific process that we have, and we involve our donors if they would like to be involved. So if that at all appeals to anyone here, I know I see some of my longtime committee members here, but if that appeals to anyone here who's new to us, I will give a plug at the end for how that happens. Stick around, and we will talk about how you could be part of that endorsement process too. If you would take us to the next slide, Tiffany. So we were just chatting ahead of getting started as to why Represent PA focuses on state legislative races, would be talking about um, uh, fair districts and what's going on in other parts of the United States with the Texas legislature, Democratic legislators leaving the state to try to prevent gerrymandering. We have the current Twitter war going on between Gavin Newsom and the current White House, which is amusing, but also a very serious conversation, which is battling the administration's attempts to get Republican-led states to gerrymander to have an impact on the upcoming 2026 congressional races. Here in Pennsylvania, as you may have heard us just chatting about, our next redistricting is 2030. So why are we talking about this now? Well, as Carol and Representative Sappey will give us more information about, there are two proposals on the table at the moment, matching proposals, one in the House, one in the Senate, to establish an independent redistricting commission, introduced by Democrats. Many of them you see on the screen there are, all of them actually that you see on the screen there are endorsed candidates, endorsed electeds. So we're very proud of the fact that they are the ones promoting these bills. But HB 31 and SB 131, the matching proposals, are not your typical legislation. They are proposals for constitutional amendments that follows a very different timeline and a very different process. So now, when we need those bills on the table, has an impact on what will happen in 2030. And our guests today will, as I said, give us a whole lot more information on that. Tiffany, if you would put up the next slide. Thank you. So Representative Christina Sappey, one of our longtime endorsed electeds from out in Chester County. Some of these are new to me here, but wonderful. The first woman and the first Democrat from that district. You can see that she is a longtime person in politics with some deep political experience. Former chief of staff to Senator Comita, and those are her commissions and committees. She serves in a wide number of them. She will be joining us later today to talk about, in I think a little bit more detail, the bills in both the House and the Senate. And Tiffany, the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. And we have Carol Kuniholm today, chair of Fair Districts PA. You can see there too her background. She founded Fair Districts, which is a nonpartisan, I should mention, volunteer-led coalition. So this is not a pitch for Democrats so much as it is an education that we all need on what fair districts means, what an independent commission means, and why we need that here. And Tiffany, if you wouldn't mind putting up uh, actually, is the next slide ours, or do we need Carol's slides, I think. So let's take down those, put hers up. In the meantime, so Carol will give us a start on everything Fair Districts is doing and the whole idea of why we need an independent redistricting commission. And I will let her take it from here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be with you. I will say, as you just heard, Fair Districts PA is nonpartisan. We're not, advocating for either party to take control of any chambers. We are all volunteer. I'm a volunteer. I've been doing this pretty much full time, and some weeks more than full time, but as a volunteer, unpaid volunteer, since 2016 when we began. And when we began, I was vice president of government and social policy for the League of Women Voters. And served in that role for 3 terms and then stepped off and have been doing Fair Districts work. Right now, I live in Chester County. Right now, I'm in State College. I am going to march in the Grange Fair with the Center County League of Women Voters. And then I am kind of traveling through North Central and Northwest and Western PA, doing some speaking between now and next Friday, and also meeting with some legislators. So a full active role with a lot of really wonderful volunteers from across the state. Why does Pennsylvania need an independent redistricting commission? Well, you've seen where we are with. Let me see, how do I get this to work? There we go. The redistricting war is here, and we've been working on this since 2016. And this summer, suddenly redistricting has burst on the national scene, and in a really toxic way, with our president asking for Texas to find or to create or to gerrymander 5 additional seats. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I want to really focus on Pennsylvania and why this is really important for us here. I will talk a little bit about what's going on nationally, but I want to focus in on what's happening here, what has happened, what is happening, what might happen, and a little bit of the agenda, some vocabulary, some history, our state story here in Pennsylvania, where we are in this, how we could fix it, why this matters for representation for all of us and for Represent PA, and what you can do to help. So 3 vocabulary words, and these get mixed up. And in fact, our state constitution mixed these words up. So it's really important to have these clear. A reapportionment is the redistribution of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives. And that happens every 10 years after the national census. And the states that gain or lose seats are really important in this, because those really have to take a look at how their districts are drawn, because they have a different number. Pennsylvania has been losing at least 1 seat every decade for a number of decades. But when you look at where the redistricting war is taking place, look at Texas and California. Those are the states that have the most congressional districts. Pennsylvania is number 5 in that, tied with Indiana, but we are the largest swing state in the country, the most populous, not the largest by geography, but the most populous swing state, which is why we have been a top target in past redistricting wars. They have not been as overt, not as public, not as visible, but we have been a very top target in the last several decades for entities who want to capture congressional seats. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So after reapportionment happens, vocabulary word number 2, redistricting, and that's the redrawing of the voting district lines. And in 1964, there was a case that some states simply never did this. They just left the district lines where they were. And so cities got larger, rural areas got less populous, and the representation got really skewed. So in 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court said the Constitution provides for 1 person, 1 vote, and that means regular redrawing of district lines. So that's redistricting. Normally it happens in the year after the census. So our next redistricting will be in 2031. The census is always in the year that ends in 0. Redistricting is always in the year that ends in 1, normally, in any case. And the states determine how this is done. They determine how the congressional and the state House and Senate districts are drawn. In Pennsylvania, our congressional map is enacted as a bill, and it must pass in both chambers and be signed by the governor. If there's divided government, that gives us some protection against crazy stuff going on. If not, we don't have that protection. And our House and Senate maps are drawn by a legislative reapportionment commission. You can see the misuse of that word. It's actually the legislative redistricting commission. They're not reapportioning, they're redistricting, but that's in our state constitution, legislative reapportionment commission. And that was put in the state constitution in 1968. And the commission is 5 people, majority and minority leaders from the House and Senate. And then the fifth member is supposed to be chosen by the other members. They have not yet ever agreed on that 5th person. And if they don't agree, then the PA Supreme Court appoints that person, who is then confirmed by a majority vote of those 4 initial commissioners. This past time, 21, and actually they spilled into 22 because of the pandemic. It was Majority Leader Kim Ward from the Senate, Minority Leader Jay Costa, Senate, Majority Carrie Benninghoff, and Minority Leader Joanna McClinton. And the chair was Mark Nordenberg. He had been recommended by the Republican majority of the court for several decades, and actually was appointed at one point and was not confirmed. The 2 Republicans on the commission at that time voted for him. 1 Democrat voted against, 1 Democrat abstained, and so he did not become commissioner. But this time he was confirmed by all 4 commissioners, who thought that he was a good choice. Just to note, this was the first time that any women had been on the commission. So this time there were 2 women on the commission. There had never, ever been any women on this commission in the past. And now we have the 3rd word, gerrymandering, which is manipulating of electoral maps for partisan advantage. And the word comes from Elbridge Gerry. He was the first to do this, and he signed off on a map that looked like a salamander, and that's where the word comes from. And the same people who draw the maps have an interest in creating districts that help them stay in office. So somebody who is an elected official with one party approves or puts forward or draws a map to benefit their party. And now, more recently, new technologies have allowed far greater precision in doing this. So this has always been a problem for over, you can see 1812, over 2 centuries, it's been going on, but kind of small manipulation, although that gerrymander, the initial salamander, is pretty extreme. But the new technologies have made it possible to really control outcomes of maps. And some people say, well, the Democrats were the first to do it. Some say the Republicans. The funny thing is, Elbridge Gerry was a member of the Democratic Republican Party. So really both parties have been doing it for a very, very long time. And there's some ways that they do it. Cracking is one that people talk about, and that's when you take a minority, a population, could be the other party, or it could be a demographic group, and you crack them so they don't have a voice. And if you look at a lot of the maps of the last decade, there was a lot of cracking going on. This one I think is particularly egregious. The Beaver area, look at those kind of crazy lines. And if you look at the demographic and the partisan affiliation, there was a Democratic along the Beaver River, a lot of industrial, blue collar, very Democratic communities, which were splintered out into 4 different House districts in the last decade. Packing is when you take the kind of reverse that, and you try to pack as many of one party into one district. And if you look at our congressional maps of the last decade, there was a lot of packing of Democrats into districts where they had less impact on the other districts. And this shows, this was Congressional District 1, which kind of went through Philadelphia, but then reached into some of the collar counties to pull Democrats into that district, so they did not have a voice in the surrounding counties. There's some other names that have come up, terms that have come up more recently. Buddymander, and that's an incumbent protection from both sides. We protect you, you protect us. A sweetheart deal. Pennsylvania's had plenty of that as well. Sometimes legislators will sign off on or vote for maps that you think, why in the world? But then you look at their district and you say, oh, right, they let you keep your district, and you didn't want it to be changed. So buddymander is their thing. And then a new one, dummymander. And that's been talked a lot about Texas. In other words, if you gerrymander too far, what you're doing is you're stretching your party's electoral strength over more and more districts. At a certain point, you stretch it too thin. And when you do that in a wave for the other party, even a slight wave can sink your whole boat. And there's conversation about Texas was already very badly gerrymandered. Pushing it to add 5 seats might actually create a dummymander. And there's no way to know what will happen until the next election, but there's divided opinion on is Texas right now, today, creating a dummy mander? And will that sink? And will they actually end up with more Democratic seats than they have now because of their greed in trying to grab more districts? So dummy mander is an interesting word. It's a new one. You'll hear it as we go through the next year or so. I promise you that'll be a word that will be tossed around. So what about Pennsylvania? In 2011, we had a map that was created that if you look at that map, you see some stuff going on. A lot of packing, a lot of cracking, a lot of bizarrely shaped districts. If you can see this one, Congressional District 7 was a national outrage. People called it Goofy Kicking Donald. Other people called it spin art. It split Montgomery County into 5 different districts. I live in Chester County. My district was split into 3 districts. I live right here in the middle of this, but to get to the other side of my district, I'd have to go through two other districts to get to the other side of mine. And what people realized is, you know, people talk about gerrymandering as one party against the other, but I've come to realize it's leadership against everybody. Because no matter what party you are, if you're in a gerrymandered district, your legislators do not need to listen to you. They are guaranteed their district. It's given to them by the leaders who drew the map. And we saw that our congressmen just stopped having town halls, stopped talking to voters, stopped paying attention, was not interested, whatever party you were. It didn't really matter. He didn't have to hear you because he had a very safe gerrymandered district, and it really didn't matter. And that's, to me, the thing that's being lost in this redistricting war conversation is it's being seen as one party against the other. And when you gerrymander a district, no matter who wins, the voters have lost any voice and any ability to hold people accountable. So you could see that in the elections that we had in 2012, 2014, 2016. It didn't matter how voters voted. The outcome was the same. There were 13 Republican seats and 5 Democratic seats. Didn't matter. And that was when you had an election that was 50-50 or went slightly blue, went slightly red. It was still the same. It was 13 Republican seats, 5 Democratic seats. And I didn't put it on here, but if you Google something called Red Map 2012 report, you'll see the Republican National Committee, Leadership Committee. They describe what they did, and they spent $1 million on PA State House races to seize control of the redistricting process. And they brag on, I was surprised when I saw this online. I thought, wait, this seems immoral and illegal to say that you locked in 13 Republican seats, 5 Democratic seats, even when the vote went +9 for a Democratic senator, +5 for a Democratic president. You still got 13 Republican seats out of 18 congressional seats. That was locked in. So as a result of that report was part of it, and these votes were part of it. In 2017, the League of Women Voters sued and said this is unlawful, this is illegal. They've locked in an outcome to an election, and the Public Interest Law Center did a really interesting thing. Past attempts to litigate partisan gerrymandering went to the Supreme Court, and they said they're not justiciable. Justiciable. I think I got that word right. They said that the federal courts have nothing to say on this issue. So the Public Interest Law Center said, okay, but the Pennsylvania Constitution has something to say, which is Pennsylvanians are promised free and equal elections. And it's not a free and equal election if the outcome is locked in. So filed suit in the Commonwealth Court, keeping it in state court. It was moved to the PA Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said the map was contrary to the Pennsylvania Constitution, the right to free and equal elections, and ended up providing a new plan. And this was a huge, I don't know if people realize how important this was for women in particular, for representation in Pennsylvania and nationally, that it was the first successful partisan gerrymandering case based on a state constitution, resulting in a new congressional map. And there are many states. Pennsylvania's was one of the first state constitutions. We were the second in the country. It was drawn and ratified before the U.S. Constitution. And many states in the country were based on the Pennsylvania Constitution. So many states' constitutions promise free and equal elections. And so this is a big win for states that have that language in their constitutions. If their courts, will uphold it, and that is a question and a challenge. So how did that work out? In 2018, we got a new map, and look at the difference between those maps. So Montgomery County now in one district, Chester County now in one district. Those districts look fairly reasonable compared to the old districts, and the outcome was much more reflective of votes cast. If it was pretty close to 50-50, there were 9-9 in both elections where that was used. That map is no longer in use because we had a new map drawn in 2021, but that new map made a big difference. And what we saw for women in representation was huge. Before 2018, Pennsylvania ranked 49th of the 50 states for women in elected office. Only Mississippi was worse. That is incredibly embarrassing to think about. And as a result of that new map, in the 2019 election, 4 women were elected to Congress. Before that, there had only been 1 woman in Congress since 2014. I mean, it was the first woman since 2014. There had been no women in Congress from 2014 to 2019. First time ever, more than 2 women in Congress at one time. And in 2022, 2023, another woman was added. So up to 5, we're back to 4 now. And women are just under 25% of Pennsylvania's congressional delegation. So still not parity, still not really close to parity, but a lot better than it was before. And what I want to say is, if you have people drawing maps for their buddies, for their friends, for their people, women can easily be shut out, and we don't have the opportunity to make sure that our delegation represents us well. So it puts the power in the hands of just a few people and can shut women out. So maps matter. Fair maps matter. It's not just for a party issue, but it's for a parity issue and for a representational issue. But the remedy from that map was temporary. There's no guarantee of a fair map in the future, and it was partial because the PA House and Senate districts drawn were still among the most gerrymandered in the nation in our last decade. And by one measure, we were the worst for most of the decade. In 2018, Washington Post had a story about us being 50% worse for our House and Senate districts, or our House districts, than the next 2 gerrymandered states. Michigan now has an independent commission, so they've taken themselves off the list of states that are facing into this. North Carolina is still in litigation, and they have been in almost constant litigation this decade because of their gerrymandered maps. We have been working on an independent redistricting commission bill since we began in 2016. In 2018, we had a lot of co-sponsors, 21 in the Senate, and the bill was passed out of the House, but a judicial districts bill was added to it, amendment, which we didn't approve and which many people disapproved of, and it got buried under amendments in the House. And then there was a House bill with 110 co-sponsors. That's more than a majority. There's 203 representatives in the House, so 110 is a healthy majority, and yet it was amended in committee with less than 24 hours notice, in a way that would have given even more control to the majority party. So we learned from that there's something going on that's connected to gerrymandering, which is important to be aware of. And I'm going to talk just really briefly about that. I know my time is short, but gerrymandering puts the power in the hands of just a few leaders, not the voters and not the majority of our legislators. So what we learned is that legislative leaders draw the districts, and that allows distorted districts that protect incumbents. But those incumbents are beholden to the leaders. And leaders will tell their colleagues, vote the way I tell you, or we'll draw you off the map. I've had legislators tell me that. I've been warned, if I don't vote the way I'm supposed to, I'll get drawn off the map. There's other things that leaders tell them also. The leaders control the rules that control the agenda, and then they block reforms like redistricting reform and many other reforms that people might want to see. And what we've learned since is leaders control the caucus budget. I had a legislator just tell me yesterday that they're given a certain amount of money for things like postage, but their staff are all paid for by the leaders. And if they don't do what the leaders tell them to, some legislators are warned, we'll take your staff away. One legislator was moved out into the hall for voting differently than what his leaders told him to do. The leaders control the budget, they control the caucus personnel, they control the legislative agenda, they control the budget negotiations, which is why we're seeing this incredible impasse right now. This is not necessarily something all our legislators want, it's something a few leaders are pushing. And they control the flow of major campaign donations. So there's a lot of things tied in together, and gerrymandering is part of what I call a tight knot of dysfunction that controls and harms our legislative process and our entire state. So why no debate or vote on things like, why can't our leaders sit down and negotiate a budget in a way that is transparent and reflects the values of most of Pennsylvania? The rules allow the leaders to control the process. The majority party makes the rules, but really the leaders make the rules. The leaders have complete control. One committee chair can outweigh everybody, or one leader can outweigh everybody, including the will of the people. So we see things like cyber charter reform, where 96% of school boards have asked for cyber charter reform. 3 attorney generals from both parties have asked for cyber charter reform. There are leaders who just say, nah, we're not going to do it. It doesn't happen. Unchecked power creates a really dangerous imbalance. And we've done a lot of, we have a team of folks who just really like digging into the details. They looked at how many bills in Pennsylvania actually pass. It's an incredibly low number compared to even part-time states that have legislatures that are in session for 2 months. We are way below almost everybody in terms of bills passed. Fewer than 1 in 5 bills are considered. Half of the bills that pass unanimously in one chamber aren't given a final vote in the other. Half that pass unanimously in one chamber aren't given a final vote in the other. That I stop and look at that and they say, these aren't partisan bills that aren't going anywhere. These are bipartisan solutions that one leader whose donors say, don't give that a vote. One leader can say, we're not going to give that a vote, and it doesn't get a vote. Less than 7% of introduced bills received a final vote in this past session, 2023-24. And then some people will say, well, that was because it was divided government, right? You had Senate controlling one chamber, House controlled by the other, Republicans controlling the Senate, Democrats controlling the House. We looked at the session before that, and it was almost exactly the same. And that was the same party, GOP, controlled both chambers. Fewer than 1 in 5 bills were considered in committee. Half the bills passed unanimously in one chamber, weren't given a final vote in the other. Just about 7% of introduced bills received a final vote. So this is an ongoing problem. It's been like this for quite a while. This session, we are probably going to see an all-time low. Only 48 bills so far this session have passed. That's 1.4% of introduced bills. And just to compare to some neighbor states, Maryland has a part-time, Virginia has a part-time session, New York, 2-year session, West Virginia, part-time session. Last 2-year session we had, that's how many bills we passed. Compared to that, in Maryland, they have a 90-day session, and their legislators make almost exactly half what our legislators make. So there's a problem. And so far, as I said, 48 bills this session have been enacted. So if you want to learn more about this, we created a separate website just for this issue called fixharrisburg.com. And I've been talking to legislators in both parties, in both chambers, who quietly say, this is a huge problem. It's incredibly frustrating to legislators who want to get things done on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania. The leaders control it, and they can't find a way around. So that's something we're trying to understand better and looking for ways to solve. And we think fixing gerrymandering is one way forward. So back to gerrymandering. We have a new congressional map this session. The House introduced a bill. The Senate passed it. This was our previous one. This is where it was in terms of partisan bias. It was way off the chart in terms of way to the, very, very biased on behalf of Republicans. The bill that was introduced this time was not as bad, but it was still pretty biased on behalf of Republicans. We advocated with Governor Wolf not to sign it, and as did other groups, and he did not sign it, and it went to court. And the court invited submission of bills, of maps from the public. I was part of a team with Common Cause, League of Women Voters, ACLU, to introduce a map. There were 13 maps in all that were submitted. And the one that won was the least change from the last time around, and also one of the most fair. If you look at, so there's a kind of the bell chart of bias. There were some that were slightly biased towards Democrats, a number very biased towards Republicans, quite a few that were trying very hard to be in the center. And the one that was accepted was a quite fair map. And it ended up with 9 Democrats, 8 Republicans in 2022, 10 Republicans, 7 Democrats in 2024, which means that when voters swing, the map actually swings, which is what it should do. And it's actually been called one of the 2 most responsive maps in the country right now. And in the House and Senate, a lot of public attention. I won't go into all the details on the public attention. There was a lot. What that yielded, though, were much better maps. So if you look at this as the House map, we went from having 15 extra R seats last decade to no extra R seats in a 50-50 election. So the way this is this is a kind of a complicated thing to look at, but in a 50-50 election, do you end up with the same number of seats? And that's what you should have. And if you look at back to 72 and 82, you can see Pennsylvania geography has a slight Republican lean, just the way people sort themselves, the way the maps, because of where people live. There's a slight Republican lean. But if you look at 2002 and 2012, there was a lot of real intentional gerrymandering. And in 2012, it really, was very intentional with 15 extra seats. I was talking to a Republican legislator who said, the current map obviously was gerrymandered for Democrats. We lost 14 R seats. I said, yes, that's right. You can't go from a map that gives you 15 extra seats and go to a fair map and not lose some seats. You lost 14. You actually got to, you're right where you should be if you look at what a fair map should deliver. For the Senate, you can see that we've 4.5 extra seats. The Senate has been gerrymandered longer than the House. And actually, when you do the math, more than the House, and is still more gerrymandered, slightly more skewed towards Republicans than the House, with 1.5 extra seats baked into it. But that's a lot less than 4.5 extra seats. So I remind you, I'm not partisan. Fair Districts PA is nonpartisan. I'm just kind of giving you the way that maps impact the way all of this plays out. And one other thing I just want to mention. So when you look at the way the maps have impacted our elections, the Senate, Republicans have controlled the Senate since 1995. 93, 94 was balanced, 25, 25. And then there was some litigation around maps. And then as new maps were put in play, they've held a strong majority ever since then. In 2008, the Democrats, after Bonus Gate, if you remember, Democrats, and after some swing there, Democrats came into the majority in the House, and there was a bill introduced by Representative Steve Samuelson, who is one of our champions on this, that had almost a majority of co-sponsors. The Democratic leadership refused to move the bill because they thought that they would control the process in 2011. There was a chance to put some real boundaries on this, and it didn't happen. And what happened since then? Well, you can see what happened since then. And so I would, to me, it's a kind of instructive reminder that folks who think, well, we're going to control the next time, so we don't want to fix this. I would say fix it, because you don't know who will control it next time. And we will all be better off if we fix it. The other thing that's important to notice, though, is if one party has control for a long time, they lose any sense of connection to voters. And if you look at the way the PA Senate has operated, there's very little accountability to voters. It's a sense of, we can do what we want, we don't have to listen. And that plays out in a lot of different ways that I would say are really harmful to Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania economy and to Pennsylvania democracy. So fixing this is important no matter what party you're on, and the implications of gerrymandered districts are far-reaching and persistent. So 2031 is coming fast. We have 2 bills, as you heard at the beginning. House Bill 31. It's actually introduced by a Democrat and a Republican, Steve Samuelson and Mark Gillen, who's a Republican from Berks County. He has been a champion of this for a long time as well, and insists he has never voted for a gerrymandered map and never will. And Senate Bill 131, introduced by Senator Tim Carney. And there's 3 pieces to this. One is to have the same commission draw the congressional and state House and Senate districts, but to use a commission that is truly independent of political partisan. These folks are not party folks. They're not selected by the parties. They're genuinely independent. 5 from each party and four independents, and chosen through a very specific selection process, a very transparent public process where the public is allowed to weigh in and to review proposed maps, and then carefully prioritize criteria. And I won't go into the details, it's a lot. I could spend a whole 45 minutes explaining the bill. I don't have time to do that, but it's a very carefully constructed bill. And I would say the couple things, we had a mapping competition and used the input from mappers on how this plays out in Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is a pretty unique geography. So we did a mapping competition. We incorporated language. We went back through bills that have been introduced since the 1980s and looked for good pieces in those bills from both parties. We also addressed prison gerrymandering, which is a really long-standing problem in Pennsylvania. I won't go into that because that would be another 45 minutes, but that's included in this. And then we had review from groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters US, Latino Justice, the Prison Policy Initiative, and we had a very detailed markup from the litigators at Campaign Legal Center to say, how does this language work? From all the litigation you've seen, is this a way to prevent litigation? Is this a way to protect voters? We're really proud of the work that was done on this bill. One of the questions that came up was about compactness. Is it possible just to set a compactness score, and would that solve the problem? And I would say if you ever looked at Pennsylvania geography, you would know that requiring compactness is not going to work. I'm in a place right now that there's mountain ridges, and if you created a square district, you might have to go over a ridge where there's no roads to get to the other part of the district. There's places where there are no bridges across rivers. There's places where there's no tunnels through mountains. And so compactness would not work well in Pennsylvania. It's actually not a great criteria for Pennsylvania when you look at our geography. The other thing is, I don't know if you've looked at our municipal boundaries, but this is Lancaster. Compactness would not do a great job for Lancaster. This is Pittsburgh. There's actually a part of Pittsburgh that's not part of Pittsburgh, but it also kind of wanders around. So compactness is not a great criteria in Pennsylvania. And so we actually moved it to be the last criteria, to say to the extent possible, without violating preceding criteria, districts should be compact in form as determined through standard compactness measures. And boundaries should correspond to geographic boundaries as much as possible as well. Another question that comes up is, what about drawing maps by algorithm? There was a great article just recently, The Rise of the Halmander. Is gerrymandering by algorithm the next frontier of partisan gerrymandering? And the answer is, we can't automate partisan gerrymandering out of existence, but we might perpetuate it through automation. And Common Cause did a nice article on this, why automated redistricting really won't work. They said anybody who creates an algorithm is going to put their bias into the program, and you can't see it, but it will be there. And ordering a computer to generate a map does not result in one map. It could result in thousands and thousands, and who's going to choose? So there's a little, it's an interesting article if that's of interest to you. So constitutional amendments in Pennsylvania take a long time. We don't allow citizen initiative. We have to go through 2 consecutive legislative sessions. Those sessions are 2 years long, and it has to pass 3 months before the next general election. So just a quick view of the timeline. The bill has been introduced. It would need to pass the House this session before the end of June, pass next session again, go to referendum to be ready in time to begin choosing the commission to draw the next map in 2031. This is a long process. So we're working on it now. Go back to the redistricting wars. Because Pennsylvania right now has divided government, we're kind of protected from what's going on. Texas, California, New York, they have an amendment. It would take a constitutional amendment to do it, so that wouldn't be until 2028. Remember, we are the most populous swing state. Divided government means no mid-decade redistricting for now, but that could change. So this is something to be watching for. The Supreme Court retention election is huge on this because that's a protection we have. But what will happen in the next redistricting process, if we don't fix this, we will be a top target for outside money trying to capture both chambers. It will be ugly, and we don't want to see that happen. So one of these bills needs to pass before the end of June. And what we would say again and again and again is no one knows who will control the PA House or Senate in 2031. No one knows who will be sitting in the governor's office, who will hold the Supreme Court majority. So no one knows who will have the final say in determining voting districts. What we do know for sure is when one party uses redistricting to hold control, the partisan divide grows and voter distrust increases. We've also been told by legislators again and again, unless advocates are loud, this will never happen. The legislators themselves, because of the way the leaders hold power, are not going to be able to push this unless there's a lot of public outcry. So check our website, fairdistrictspa.com. We've got to join us. So if you're not on our email list, please join us and get on that. Sign our petition. We have a take action section. There's lots of ways people can engage. We have a donate page. And I would say one thing, nobody comes to this because it's their top issue. Your issue might be representation for women. It might be representation for minority populations. It might be fair school funding. It might be environmental. Whatever your concern is, nobody wakes up and says, ooh, gerrymandering, that's what I really care about. Maybe there are very few, but it's not the issue we care about most, but it's the issue we need to fix so we can fix those other issues. And we had a bunch of wonderful interns this summer, last summer. One of them said in his application, the future of democracy runs through Pennsylvania. And I think that's really true. And so this is an issue we need to demonstrate. We demonstrated to the country that we have a constitution that promises us free and equal elections. Now we need to demonstrate to the country that it is possible for a state without citizen initiative to get this reform passed. So that's what we're working on. Happy to have you join us in any way that you can. And thank you for letting me talk this morning.
Carol, thank you. That was actually the most fascinating part for me was looking at the geography and recognizing that compactness doesn't work because there's been so much talk about, well, just, draw the maps with the RPI, and it's all fascinating. Thank you. Tiffany, do we have Rep Sappey with us? Excellent. So I am, without further chit chat on my part, going to ask her to give her view of what's going on the ground in the House.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. It's nice to be here with you, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your interest in this issue and your engagement. I mean, Represent always brings some of these really meaty issues to the forefront, and it's important to understand them. And obviously, I'm so grateful to Carol and for her incredible dedication to this issue. She's an absolute warrior. So she just gave you an awful lot of information to digest, and some of you may have some background in this. I've seen some constituents on here on the call today, and I know that a lot of folks here in Chester County do understand these issues. But I think one thing that's important to understand in Pennsylvania is just how big a state it is, as Carol pointed out, and the regional differences we have, in addition to political differences, regional differences. Play a huge role in how we legislate and how we prioritize legislation in Harrisburg. And southeastern Pennsylvania is the economic engine for the state. It is highly educated, and we are very engaged and politically motivated here. And we see similarities in the western part of the state in Pittsburgh, but I think in the center part of the state and the northern tier, we call that the T of Pennsylvania, um, they don't have economy. They don't have high numbers of educated folks. Like in my district alone, 25% of my constituents have an advanced degree. So that's a really big difference between how we look at the issues and how we vote compared to the rest of the state. And I think when we're talking about what's important and fair elections, we need to understand that we have high information voters here in the southeast, but we have a lot of folks in the rest of the part of this, parts of the state that are not receiving the same information, don't understand the same information, and don't have that critical thinking ability. Their schools aren't as strong. I hate to say this, and that's a whole conversation for another day. But we think about things very differently, and so that's why it's so important for advocacy to be happening in all different parts of the state. Neighbors need to be talking to neighbors in the Northeast and in the Northwest and the center part of the state in terms that they can understand about how this impacts them. And one of the things, that we're seeing in Chester County, I can only speak to Chester County, but it's probably happening statewide, is both parties are losing registration right now. People are really unhappy with partisan politics, and they have been for some time, but now they're walking away, and they're either registering as independents, and or they're not showing up to vote. And this is something that should concern all of us, because it just, when I see large numbers of folks registering as independents, what that says to me is, this system is rigged, this system is unfair, my issues are not being heard, and no one cares about me and my family and my future. And I think we need to be listening to that. So, House Bill 31, which is something, under different numbers, I've been a supporter of redistricting reform since I came into office, and as a staffer many years before that, going back to 2006 when I worked for Barb McIlvaine Smith, is so important. The district that I ran in 2018 was so cracked, as Carol pointed out. They had completely carved out the Kennett Square area because there were larger numbers of Democratic voters there, and pushed the district up into West Goshen around Westchester, where there were more Republican registrations. And that was an extremely gerrymandered seat, and for another conversation another day, because it is very political. We worked really hard to flip this seat, and when we redistricted in the last cycle, we see now that it is more compact, even though compactness, we've had a conversation about, doesn't always work. I think compactness has a big impact on how we govern. The issues in Kennett Square Borough relate to New Garden Township. Kennett Borough was, in the first map I ran in, was not there. So people's issues were being separated, and their common interests and priorities were being separated. And so that, I'm pitting people in the mushroom industry and a more agricultural community against the interests of people living in a very dense community outside of Westchester Borough. And how do you govern that way? I mean, taking Kennett Square Borough away from the rest of the suburban Kennett area made it very difficult to figure out, how to serve everybody. And I think so that's where compactness, putting the things back together is to the best of your ability, made a lot of sense. And so it's been something that I've seen to work better for the community when everybody has their interests more clearly aligned. So House Bill 31 is something that obviously Steve Samuelson has introduced with Mark Gillen, and I'm the third on this bill. I believe strongly in it. I wish we had more co-sponsors on it. I mean, as Carol pointed out, we previously had over 100 a couple of cycles ago. We have almost half the Democratic caucus co-sponsoring this legislation. And so many of the co-sponsors are from the southeastern part of the state and the southwest in the Pittsburgh suburbs. So again, this says something about what's going on in rural PA. That they're not paying attention to this, or they're not understanding this, or they don't care about this. But I am still, hopeful that we have a chance here. We do have two Republicans co-sponsoring the legislation, and so I think that's important. And hopefully we can continue to get more sponsors. What really matters, though, more than co-sponsorship, is what happens in the committee and what happens on the floor. That's where the rubber hits the road. So co-sponsorship has traditionally signaled that the bill has a really good chance. And I think that's not always the case, especially when I'm on 5 committees now, and I have so much legislation coming across my desk to choose from. I can look at something and say, I believe in that, and I'm going to vote for that when it comes across, but I can't put my name on 2,500 bills a term. It makes no sense. And I can't champion every single bill that I put my name on. So I need to be really selective here. And I've chosen this as one of my top issues. So the thing I'm hopeful about this term is that, again, we have half of our caucus and we have a good number in the Senate on this legislation. And very recently, the committee chair of the State Government Committee, Carol Hill Evans from York, PA, signed on to the bill and has also indicated that she would like to have a hearing on the bill. That's huge. And I think some of us who have been listening to this information for a long time are like, oh my gosh, another hearing? What don't we understand about this? But remember, we not flip the house, but we turn over every 2 years. So we are constantly re-educating the chamber. And, we have a lot of new members that really need to understand what they're voting on in committee before it goes to the floor. And so the fact that Carol wants to have a hearing is a really important sign. It also takes a lot of chutzpah because she's going to be telling our leadership, I want this, as a committee chair and as a member, saying that she wants to educate people on this issue and wants to see some traction occur, I think is something to be hopeful about. So, I'm hopeful that it would pass out of committee. I'm pretty sure it could. And that's just based on, the makeup of the committee at this point. But how it does on the floor could be a really big debate. And I think this is the time where we really want to be working in other parts of the state to have them contacting their legislators to make sure they understand what this means. We have the Democrats have the House by 1 seat. And I'm always hopeful about that. I mean, I'd love to pick up more seats, but I think it's more important to pick up seats in the Senate, as you guys have talked about. But, it is really fair. And we debate hard in committee and on the floor. So, I'm hopeful that we could get this through. But as we say, we could get it through this term. The 2-year term ends June 30th November 30th, 2026. And then we would have to reintroduce it and get it through the 27-28 session as well. So, but I think we have an opportunity here to do something fair, and something that could be put into perpetuity. The next, not just a temporary fix, but something, to create fair maps in Pennsylvania, in the next 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years going forward, and how important that is given the landscape right now. So thank you all again. That's my color commentary. We can talk about these issues till the cows come home, but let me know how I can help you all educate other people. I'm talking to my colleagues across the aisle, and obviously right now it's very tense. We don't have a budget. Everybody's gone to their corners, and it's an extremely uncomfortable summer. So, but we need to keep talking, and this issue cannot get put in a drawer. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Sappey, for that color commentary, as you put it. I think, we have a lot of folks on this call who do know how these processes work because they're very informed folks and very informed voters. But the sort of lack of information and education sort of across the state, I think is what you've identified as part of the main issue here. And that is in part what we're trying to do by holding these breakfast briefings. So so thank you. And you've also teed up quite nicely my little parting discussion. So thank you very much. Tiffany, could you just pull those last few slides up? That would be great. So don't leave yet. Here's the money pitch, because you knew it was coming. At Represent PA, this is not an off year for us. You've heard a lot of discussion about bipartisanship and how difficult it is based on the current seat count, if you will, in both the House and the Senate. Very slim majority for Democrats in the House. We have seats that we need to pick up in the Senate, and that is going to be a very tough task for us. We have opportunities, but we are still going to have to raise a tremendous amount of money. And early money for our candidates, in particular the women candidates, is critical. So we will be opening our incumbent protection in September. We do have some vulnerable incumbents, and they will need protection early. And so our incumbent protection round will open in September. We will have challenger candidates open early in the new year. Again, early money for these women who need to get their campaigns up and running, who need to establish themselves. I hate to use the word as viable candidates. Money means viability. It's one of the measures of that. So we are very focused on getting our endorsed candidates money, as much money as up front, to help them establish their campaign offices and get started. If this process of endorsing candidates is interesting to you and you would like to be part of it, that is something at Represent PA that we do that other political action committees do not. Donors who invest at $100 a month for a recurring donation, or $1,200 a month a year, are invited to be part of the endorsement process. And I know there are lots of folks here that are part of that. It's a very exciting process where you get to see on the ground with us making decisions how much money we invest and which candidates we're investing in. So if that's interesting to you, please join us. We would love that. Tiffany, if you would not mind pulling up the next one, thank you. We have a breakfast briefing coming up next month, September 8th. We touched a little bit, Carol touched a little bit on how important our courts, and in particular the Supreme Court, is for maintaining protections for our voters. And we have Supreme Court elections coming up this year that are very, very important. So we will have a discussion of judicial retention elections with Deborah Gross, the CEO and president of Pennsylvanians for Modern Court. That is September 8th. And keep an eye on your inboxes for those invitations. Again, would love to have you involved. That is, of course, our website there, but there are many, many ways to get involved. Attend breakfast briefings like this, but bring your friends. Host an event. We love to have events across the state because we are statewide. And anyone willing to host an event, we will work with you to do that. Of course, join our mailing list if you're not already on there. Follow us on social media. And of course, the biggest one, please donate. We are gearing up for a very, very, very important cycle in 2026, and our work has already started. The money that you donate for us allows us to give important money to these candidates. And that is our main mission. So thank you very much for joining us today. We do post these videos on YouTube. So if you would like to let other people know that this very, very interesting discussion is available for viewing on our YouTube channel, please do. Thank you all. I will let you go on with your day. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Rep. Sappey. Thank you, everyone, for attending.